Prince William rushed to emergency room after suffering from a serious health problem. The night everything changed began without warning. It was meant to be another typical evening for Prince William, filled with meetings, correspondence, and quiet moments of planning alongside his private secretary. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. Yet hidden beneath that familiar rhythm was something no one saw coming: the quiet onset of exhaustion that had been creeping into his life for weeks. Those close to him had noticed subtle signs: moments of fatigue during royal engagements, brief pauses in his speeches, a faraway look in his eyes that betrayed a mind stretched thin. But William, ever the image of composure, brushed off every concern with his usual determination. He had duties to fulfill, a nation to reassure, and a father whose own health had recently become a national concern. There was no room for weakness. Earlier that day, William had attended a private meeting at Windsor, discussing upcoming climate initiatives and preparing for a speech that would take him abroad within the week. It had been a long day, one of those that stretched into the night. His aides, loyal and discreet, noticed he was unusually quiet during dinner. His responses were slower, his focus drifting, but he smiled as he always did, insisting he was fine. After all, he had faced tougher days: the loss of his mother, the scrutiny of the world, the burden of preparing for a throne that loomed closer each year. Fatigue was nothing new. He could handle it, or so he believed. By the time he returned to Kensington Palace that night, the air was heavy with autumn mist. The lights in the windows glowed faintly, casting a warm hue across the courtyard. Inside, Kate had already retired upstairs to read through the children's school notes. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of security radios outside. William went to his study, intending to finish reviewing some briefings before bed. But as the clock ticked past 10, his pen slipped from his hand. He felt a sudden dizziness, a heaviness pressing down on his chest, and the world seemed to tilt ever so slightly. He tried to steady himself, gripping the edge of the desk, but the feeling intensified, his breath came shallow and uneven, and the documents before him blurred into indistinct shapes. A wave of nausea followed, then darkness creeping into the corners of his vision. He stumbled toward the door, calling faintly for help, but the sound barely carried beyond the room. Within moments, he collapsed to the floor. The thud was muffled, almost delicate, but enough for a nearby staff member to hear. The palace's emergency protocol activated instantly. Security officers and medical aides rushed into the room. What they found was something none of them could have prepared for: the future king lying unconscious, his skin pale, his pulse weak, but present. There was no time for hesitation. Within minutes, a call was placed to Royal Medical Services, and an ambulance was discreetly dispatched to the palace gates. The staff moved with trained precision, yet beneath the professionalism was fear. Royals were supposed to be symbols of strength, figures beyond ordinary frailty. Yet here, on the floor of his own study, the illusion shattered. When the ambulance arrived, it did so without fanfare. Lights dimmed, sirens silent. The security detail cleared the way, ensuring no onlookers could witness what was unfolding. 2 paramedics entered through a side door, carrying equipment usually reserved for high-security emergencies. William was lifted onto a stretcher, his face still and colorless. The staff watched in stunned silence as the vehicle disappeared into the night, heading toward a London hospital whose location was known only to a handful of officials. Kate was informed minutes later. She had just put down her book when her phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm but urgent. Her first instinct was disbelief. William was young, active, always on the move. He was not someone who fell ill easily. But the words repeated, "He's being taken to hospital." She froze, her breath catching in her throat, then moved swiftly, calling for her security team. Within 10 minutes, she was in a car heading toward the city, her heart pounding as her mind raced through possibilities. Stroke, heart, exhaustion, she didn't know. She only knew she had to get to him. The drive to the hospital felt endless. The city lights blurred past as her convoy cut through traffic. Every second stretched longer than the last. Inside the car, Cade remained composed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. But those who saw her eyes that night said they reflected a fear she had never shown publicly. The woman who had stood gracefully before cameras, who had smiled through criticism and pressure, now sat in silence, praying that the man she loved would survive whatever unseen battle was raging. Inside him, at the hospital, the situation was already critical. Doctors were working quickly, conducting scans, tests, and procedures. They had been briefed on the patient's identity, but were told only the essentials. He had collapsed suddenly, was unresponsive for several minutes, and exhibited symptoms that required immediate attention. Teams from cardiology and neurology were called in. The atmosphere was tense yet eerily calm, the kind of calm that comes only in the face of deep uncertainty. Outside, the world remained unaware, but inside those walls, the royal family's future hung in the balance. When Kate arrived, escorted through a private entrance, she was met by a senior physician who spoke to her in low tones. The medical jargon blurred together, words like collapse, episode, tests, vitals, but one phrase stood out sharply in her memory. "He's stable for now." She nodded, but her heart didn't believe it. Stable was a fragile word. Stable could change at any moment. Hours passed. The doctors moved methodically, monitoring his condition, consulting specialists, ensuring absolute discretion. The hospital's communication lines were secured. Only the king, the queen, and a small inner circle were informed. Even William's closest friends were kept in the dark. The palace aides who gathered in hushed corners exchanged glances filled with dread. They knew what was at stake. A monarchy already strained by health concerns and public skepticism could not afford another shock. At 2 in the morning, a physician emerged from William's room to speak with Kate. His expression was unreadable, professional, guarded. He explained that they had managed to stabilize him after several hours of treatment. They were still running tests to determine the underlying cause, but for the moment, his vitals had improved. Kate's shoulders trembled with relief, but it was a fragile, temporary comfort. She asked to see him. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. Inside the dimly lit room, William lay motionless. Machines hummed softly beside him. His hand rested limply against the white sheets. Kate approached slowly, her steps barely audible on the tile floor. She took his hand, whispering his name, her voice breaking. The sight of him like this, the man who had stood so strong through every trial, was almost unbearable. She had seen him tired before, had seen him worried, but never like this. This was vulnerability stripped bare, the kind that no title could shield. She stayed by his side through the night, barely moving. Nurses came and went, checking monitors and adjusting equipment, but she hardly noticed them. Her world had shrunk to the small space between his hand and hers. Outside that room, decisions were being made about statements, about media, about managing the inevitable storm that would follow. But for her, none of that mattered. All that mattered was whether he would wake up. By dawn, word began to spread within palace circles that the Prince of Wales had suffered a serious health event. The phrase was deliberately vague, designed to inform without revealing too much, but once spoken, it could not be contained. By early morning, journalists were already contacting their sources, sensing a major story. The palace's communications team debated for hours how to handle the growing wave of inquiry. The longer they waited, the more speculation would grow. Yet, the truth that the heir to the throne had collapsed and remained under medical observation was almost too heavy to release. Meanwhile, King Charles arrived quietly at the hospital under heavy guard. He was said to be visibly shaken, though he tried to maintain composure. For all the tension that had sometimes defined their relationship, William was still his son, his firstborn, the living symbol of the monarchy's future. As he entered the hospital's private wing, aides stepped aside. He spent nearly an hour inside before leaving without comment. Those who saw him said his expression carried both grief and determination. Throughout the morning, London buzzed with speculation. Crowds began forming near the hospital gates, holding signs, murmuring prayers, asking questions no one could yet answer. Some reporters spoke of exhaustion, others hinted at something more serious. Medical experts were brought onto television panels to discuss what could cause such a sudden collapse in a man of William's age. Each theory only deepened the sense of uncertainty. Inside the hospital, Kate continued her vigil. Doctors reported mild improvements, but urged caution. It was too soon to draw conclusions. She listened to every word, committing each to memory, her heart swinging between hope and dread. She texted her family, reassured the children through carefully chosen words, and prayed that when they woke later that morning, there would be good news. As daylight spread across the city, the palace finally issued a short statement confirming that the Prince of Wales had been admitted to hospital after a medical emergency. It mentioned nothing more, but that was enough to ignite a storm. News channels switched to rolling coverage. Crowds grew thicker. Messages of support poured in from across the world, from politicians, public figures, and ordinary citizens alike. For many, the news struck deeply personal chords. Prince William had always represented continuity, stability, a link between tradition and the modern world. The idea that he could suddenly be vulnerable shattered that image, reminding everyone that even the most composed among us are not invincible. As evening approached once again, a strange calm returned to the hospital. The meteor remained outside, but the frenzy had softened into quiet anticipation. Inside, William's condition continued to improve gradually. Kate, exhausted yet unwilling to leave, remained beside him. She held his hand, whispering softly, recalling moments from their life together, the day they met, their wedding, their children's laughter. She wanted those memories to fill the silence, to pull him back from wherever he had drifted. And somewhere between the steady rhythm of the monitors and the sound of her voice, his fingers moved. A faint twitch, almost imperceptible. Kate froze, then leaned closer. His eyes fluttered open for the briefest second before closing again. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to spark the first fragile glimmer of hope since the night began. Outside, London remained restless, the world still waiting for answers. But inside that small room, something had shifted. The worst might have passed, but the questions had only just begun. What had caused the collapse? Was it stress, an undiagnosed condition, or something deeper? The truth remained hidden, waiting to unfold in the days to come. For now, all that mattered was that he was alive. Yet, as the doctors reviewed his scans and the palace prepared its next statement, one thought lingered in the air like a silent warning. This was not over. The night that had changed everything was only the beginning of a story that would reach far beyond the walls of that hospital and into the heart of the royal family itself. Behind the palace gates, the atmosphere was unlike anything the royal staff had experienced in years. The morning air hung thick with anxiety as senior aides and advisors gathered in hushed urgency to manage what could quickly become a constitutional crisis if the worst were to happen. The walls of Buckingham Palace had witnessed centuries of turmoil, abdications, scandals, tragedies, but what was unfolding now struck at something more personal. This was not a political crisis, but a human one. The heir to the British throne was fighting for stability in a hospital bed, and every passing minute deepened the uncertainty about what would happen if his condition worsened. By dawn, word of the emergency had already begun to ripple through the upper corridors of royal administration. The private secretaries for both the King and the Prince of Wales were already coordinating, their phones constantly buzzing as they attempted to balance protocol with compassion. On one end of the line, aides tried to manage medical updates with careful discretion. On the other, communications officers debated what the public should be told. The dilemma was stark: reveal too much and risk a media firestorm, reveal too little and fuel dangerous speculation. In the middle of that storm stood King Charles. He had risen earlier than usual, unable to sleep after receiving the call hours before. Those who saw him that morning described a man haunted by conflicting instincts, the father desperate to protect his son, and the monarch bound by duty to reassure the nation. His own health issues had made him more reflective in recent months, more aware of his mortality and the fragile line of succession. Now that awareness had hardened into something heavier, he sat alone in his private study for a long time, staring at an untouched cup of tea before calling for his advisers. The meeting that followed was somber. The king wanted clarity, not rumors, not theories, facts, but even the palace's medical liaison could offer little certainty. Prince William remained under observation, stable but weak. The cause was still unclear. Early reports suggested a sudden cardiovascular issue, possibly stress-induced, though the doctors refused to confirm anything until further tests were complete. For the king, that uncertainty was agonizing. He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his face drawn and pale. Those closest to him said he spoke little, but when he did, his words were soft, almost prayerful. "He's the future. We must protect him." At Kensington Palace, meanwhile, the household staff moved with quiet urgency. The usual morning rhythm, the opening of drapes, the preparation of breakfast, the hum of routine was replaced by silence. Kate's private secretary was coordinating updates between the hospital and the palace press office, while also ensuring that the children remained shielded from the escalating tension. George, Charlotte, and Louis had noticed their mother's absence when they awoke. They asked questions, their small voices full of confusion. The nanny, gentle but firm, explained that Papa wasn't feeling well and that Mommy was with him. They accepted it for now. As the clock struck 8, the palace press office prepared the official morning briefing for senior aides. It was terfactual and cautious, a pattern that reflected centuries of royal crisis management, but the tone was different this time. This wasn't scandal containment or rumor control. It was about humanity and how much of it the monarchy dared to show. One communications aide, younger and more attuned to modern media, argued that the public should be given more than platitudes. "People need to see that the royal family bleeds too," she said softly, Her words hung in the air. Some nodded in agreement, others frowned. Back in the hospital, Kate had just spoken with the doctors again. The results from the night's tests had started coming in. Nothing life-threatening had been confirmed, but the exhaustion on the faces of the medical staff told her everything. This was serious. She thanked them quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, then returned to William's side. He was still resting, his color slightly better, his breathing steadier. She reached out, brushing her fingers lightly against his hand, remembering the man she had first met at university, the one who had made her laugh with shy humor, who had carried himself with effortless confidence even before the world placed the weight of destiny upon him. He had always seemed unbreakable. Now that illusion was gone. Behind the hospital's closed doors, officials moved discreetly to coordinate security. Extra protection was stationed around the building, and plainclothes officers were placed in key areas. They were under strict orders to prevent leaks. Every staff member was required to sign additional confidentiality agreements. The hospital's upper floor was effectively transformed into a royal enclave, sealed off, silent and tense. Even senior nurses whispered as they passed. Outside, the media frenzy was intensifying. By mid-morning, camera crews had established permanent positions near the hospital entrance. Reporters broadcasting live updates that were more speculation than fact. Every passing black car, every glimpse of a figure in a dark coat, sent photographers scrambling. The public, too, began to gather, some carrying flowers, others standing in quiet solidarity. It wasn't just concern for William as a prince. It was empathy for a husband and father, a man many had grown up watching. Within the palace, conversations turned increasingly urgent. Advisors reviewed contingency plans that were usually reserved for extreme circumstances. What to do if the heir were incapacitated for an extended period, how to adjust public duties, how to manage constitutional responsibilities, though no one said it aloud. The unspoken question hovered like a shadow. What if the worst happened? The king called another meeting that afternoon, this time including the prime minister. It was meant to be private, but word leaked quickly that a high-level consultation had taken place. The prime minister expressed concern and offered any governmental support the family might need. Charles thanked him, his voice subdued. It was a reminder that the monarchy and the government were intertwined, that even in matters of personal crisis, the institution could never truly rest. As evening approached, the palace released another statement confirming that Prince William was recovering under medical supervision. It was intended to reassure the public, but for many, it raised more questions than it answered. Recovering from what? How serious had it been? The lack of details only deepened the intrigue. Analysts on television dissected every word, every pause in the spokesperson's tone, trying to extract meaning from the palace's careful restraint. Inside, Kate finally managed a few hours of rest on a small couch near William's bed. She had refused to leave the hospital despite gentle encouragement from aides. The doctors were optimistic but cautious, warning that the next 24 hours would be crucial. She sat beside him again, whispering softly to him about home, about the children, about the world, waiting for him to open his eyes and smile again. And as she spoke, she noticed a flicker of movement, the smallest sign that somewhere within the fog he was still fighting. That moment renewed something in her, strength, faith, resolve. Whatever had caused this collapse, they would face it together. But deep down, she knew that once he recovered, everything would change. This scare would not fade quietly. It would force a reckoning with his health, his role, and the expectations that had nearly broken him. Meanwhile, within the palace, the staff worked through the night, preparing for every possible outcome. Briefings were updated hourly, security tightened, and communication lines between the king, Queen Camilla, and the hospital remained open. The gravity of the situation united even those who had once been divided by palace politics, for now all differences were set aside. The priority